I used to rent a small duplex with my best friend Emma. It was an older place, but the rent was cheap, and we liked having a little space of our own. The only downside? Our landlord rented out the basement unit to a man named Greg. At first, Greg seemed normal. He was in his late 40s, kept to himself, and we barely saw him. But as time went on, little things started happening that made us uneasy. It started with the noises. Late at night, when everything was quiet, we'd hear scraping sounds coming from the floor. At first, we thought it was just pipes or the house settling. But then we started hearing whispers. Emma and I would be sitting in the living room, and suddenly we'd hear this low mumbling coming from the vents, like Greg was talking to himself, but directly beneath us. One night around midnight, we heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a woman's voice. Except Greg lived alone. Emma and I just stared at each other, both thinking the same thing. Was he having a guest over? Was he watching something loud on his phone? But as we listened closer, we realized the voice wasn't coming from a TV. It was coming from the vent. It was whispering our names. At this point, we were officially freaked out. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe he had guests over. Maybe we were imagining things. But the next morning, Emma brought up something that made everything worse. She had gone into the kitchen around 2 a.m. to get water and noticed the basement door was unlocked. It was never supposed to be unlocked. We rarely went near it, and it led directly down to Greg's unit. But that night, it was open just a crack. We told ourselves we were just being paranoid, but then things escalated. One night, Emma was home alone when she heard someone breathing outside her bedroom door. She texted me, freaking out, saying she could hear heavy, slow breathing on the other side. She locked herself in her room until I got home, but by then the sound was gone. We told the landlord about Greg's behavior, but he brushed it off, saying Greg was a bit odd but harmless. That same week, we started noticing things in our apartment weren't where we left them. At first, it was small. A cabinet door slightly open, a water bottle knocked over. Then it got worse. One day, I came home and found my bedroom window wide open. Emma hadn't touched it. Neither had I. And Greg? His basement unit had no windows. That night, we heard footsteps. Not from outside, not from the basement, inside our apartment. We locked ourselves in Emma's room and called the cops. When they arrived, they searched the entire place and didn't find anyone. But they did find something in the basement. A hole. A small, hidden hole in the ceiling of Greg's unit, leading up to our floorboards. He had been watching us, listening to us, possibly sneaking in when we weren't home. The cops questioned Greg, but he claimed he had no idea how the hole got there. He was evicted a week later, but the damage was done. To this day, I triple-check my doors and windows before bed. I never really paid much attention to my neighbors. I live in a decent apartment complex. Nothing fancy, but it's quiet, which is all I really cared about. But after what happened last year, I never ignore my instincts about people anymore. It started with little things. I'd be coming home from work and notice my neighbor from 3B, this older guy named Gary, standing in the hallway just staring. He wouldn't say anything, just watch as I unlocked my door. The first few times, I thought maybe he was just waiting for someone or had zoned out, but after it kept happening, I started feeling uneasy. One night, around 11 p.m., I stepped out to grab a package from the lobby. As soon as I opened my door, I saw Gary standing there. He was just outside his apartment, barefoot, wearing a stained white t-shirt, and staring at my door. I froze. He didn't say anything. He didn't even react to me opening my door. Just stood there, breathing heavy. Trying to act normal, I gave him a nod and quickly walked past. As I reached the stairwell, I glanced back. He was still watching me. That night, I made sure to double lock my door. Over the next few weeks, I kept catching him standing in the hallway, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes just outside my door, listening. I could hear his heavy breathing through the peephole. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of something scratching at my door. I sat up, my heart racing. At first, I thought maybe it was an animal or just the building settling. But then I heard something worse, my doorknob jiggling. I grabbed my phone and looked at my security camera feed. The hallway was dimly lit, but there he was. Gary, crouched down in front of my door. He had something in his hand, a key. My stomach dropped. He was trying to get in. I immediately called the police. I whispered to the dispatcher what was happening while watching him through the camera. He kept twisting the key, testing it in the lock, mumbling something under his breath. The police arrived within 5 minutes, but the second he heard them coming up the stairs, he bolted back into his apartment. When the cops knocked on his door, he refused to answer. Since he hadn't technically broken in, there wasn't much they could do except file a report. The next morning, I went straight to my landlord. Turns out Gary was the previous tenant of my unit. He had lived there for over a decade before being evicted 6 months earlier for failing to pay rent. Apparently, he never gave back his key. I moved out that weekend. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't locked my deadbolt that night. I used to live in a small rental house with my fiancé, Mark. It was nothing special, just a cozy little place in an older neighborhood where all the houses were built in the 1950s. The kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors. Or at least, I thought they did. Our house had an attic, but it was one of those crawl spaces with no actual staircase. Just a small square opening in the ceiling with a flimsy pull-down ladder. We never went up there. We had no reason to. That changed when our next-door neighbor, Tom, started acting weird. At first, it was little things. I'd catch him staring at our house whenever I left for work. Not a casual glance, but full-on, unblinking staring. One afternoon, Mark and I were working in the backyard when we heard footsteps coming from inside our house. We froze. We knew no one else was home. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police, while Mark cautiously stepped inside. But when he checked every room, nothing. No sign of a break-in, no unlocked doors. We told ourselves it was just the house settling. That was mistake number one. A few days later, I was in the kitchen when I heard scraping sounds coming from the ceiling. I stopped what I was doing and listened. It was faint but rhythmic, like someone was dragging something across the attic floor. My stomach twisted. I called Mark, who was at work, and told him what I heard. He told me to get out of the house immediately and wait for him outside. When he got home, he grabbed a flashlight and pulled down the attic ladder. I stood at the bottom, my heart racing as he climbed up. Then, his voice went tense. "There's stuff up here." I felt a chill go through me. "Like what?" I whispered. Mark came down, his face pale. "There's a sleeping bag up there, a bottle of water, empty food wrappers, and..." He hesitated. "A hole, a small one, near the vent." I didn't understand at first, but then it hit me. The vent led directly into our bedroom. Someone had been living in our attic, watching us. We called the police, and when they arrived, they confirmed what we already suspected. The dust near the attic opening had been disturbed recently, meaning someone had been climbing up and down. And then came the worst part. One of the officers noticed something strange about the attic hatch. The latch had scratch marks on it, like someone had been trying to force it open from the inside. Whoever had been up there had wanted to come down. The police checked the attic but found no one. They guessed that whoever had been living there left through the roof when they heard us coming. But when they searched the house, they did find something else. The small side window in our laundry room, one we never opened, was unlocked. And next to it, a set of footprints. The cops questioned our neighbors, but no one had seen anything suspicious, except for Tom, the guy next door. When they asked him, he just smirked. "You won't find him," he said. "Not if he doesn't want to be found." Something about the way he said it, like he knew exactly what was going on, made my skin crawl. We moved out a week later. And to this day, I don't know if the person in our attic was just some random drifter, or if our neighbor knew more than he let on. I used to live in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone mostly kept to themselves. I'd give the occasional wave to my neighbors, but never really interacted much beyond that, until I had to. There was a man who lived next door to me. I'll call him Doug. He was probably in his late 50s, always wearing the same worn-out flannel jacket, and had this unnerving smile that never left his face. At first, I thought he was just one of those overly friendly types. But the more I saw him, the more I realized his smile never changed. It was always the same. Wide, forced, and unnatural. At first, I didn't think much of him, but he always seemed to be watching. Whenever I left for work, he was standing on his porch, smiling. When I came home, he was there. If I took the trash out, he was outside, waiting. One evening, I was getting home late, and as I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Doug was standing on his porch again. But this time, he wasn't just watching. He was waving. Not a normal wave, a slow, robotic motion, like he was rehearsing it. I forced a smile and nodded before quickly going inside. The moment I shut the door, I peeked through the blinds. He was still waving. At that point, I started getting creeped out. But what happened a few nights later made me realize this wasn't just some weird, lonely guy. It was around 2 a.m., and I was half asleep when I heard something outside my bedroom window. It was faint, like shuffling, then a slight tapping on the glass. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. Slowly, I walked toward the window, my pulse pounding in my ears. And that's when I saw him. Doug was standing right outside my window, smiling. He didn't flinch when my flashlight hit him. He just stood there, his face pressed against the glass. His breath fogged up the window as he whispered something I couldn't hear. I backed away immediately, locked my bedroom door, and called the police. I was barely able to speak because I was so shaken. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and wait for officers to arrive. Meanwhile, I could hear him tapping on the window. Tap, 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 like he was trying to get my attention. After what felt like forever, I saw the glow of red and blue lights outside. The second the cops pulled up, Doug casually walked back to his house like nothing had happened. When the police confronted him, he acted confused, said he was just checking on me because he thought he heard something near my window. They couldn't arrest him for trespassing since he was technically still on his property, just near the property line. They warned him to stay away from me, but I knew that meant nothing. The next morning, I found something that still gives me chills. Outside my window, Doug had drawn something in the condensation on the glass. A smiley face. I moved out the following month. I've had my fair share of weird neighbors, but none of them have ever made me feel as violated as the woman who lived across from me in my old apartment complex. Her name was Lisa, and at first she seemed completely normal. She was probably in her late 40s, lived alone, and was always friendly when we passed each other in the hallway. But after a few months, she started acting off. It started with the staring. Whenever I left for work, I'd see her standing in her doorway watching me. She never said anything, just stood there, completely still, smiling. At first, I thought maybe she was just socially awkward, but it got worse. One night, I was watching TV in my living room when I got this weird feeling, like I was being watched. I turned my head toward my window, and there she was. Lisa. Standing on her balcony, staring directly into my apartment. I live on the 3rd floor. My balcony faces a courtyard, so it's not uncommon to see neighbors outside. But she wasn't just outside. She was standing in complete darkness, not moving, not blinking, just watching me. I felt a chill go up my spine. I tried to ignore it, but when I glanced back a few minutes later, she was still there. At that point, I shut my curtains. But over the next few weeks, I started noticing other weird things. Every morning when I left for work, I'd find small objects in front of my door. Random things like a single flower, a button, or a torn piece of fabric. I had no idea if she was leaving them or if it was just coincidence, but it creeped me out enough to start using my peephole before opening the door. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. As I passed by my bedroom window, I noticed something off. My curtains were slightly open. I never leave my curtains open at night. And then I saw it. A shadow moving from Lisa's balcony. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone, trying to stay calm, and slowly peeked through the blinds. Lisa was standing on her balcony, looking directly at my bedroom window. I don't know how long she had been there. I don't know if she had been watching me sleep. But the second she saw me notice her, she waved. A slow, deliberate wave, like she was acknowledging me. That was it. I called my building's security and told them everything. The next morning, they went to talk to Lisa. But when she answered the door, she acted completely normal. "Oh, I was just enjoying the fresh air," she said, laughing it off. I wasn't buying it. That night, I pushed my dresser in front of my bedroom window before going to bed. But when I woke up in the morning, I noticed something on my balcony, a handprint, pressed against the glass. The problem? My balcony door was locked. There was no way someone could have gotten up there, unless they climbed. I broke my lease and moved out within the month. I never saw Lisa again, but sometimes I still wonder, how many nights had she been standing there before I ever noticed?